Hey, so there was this article posted by the Washington Post that I shared yesterday. It's called To the New Culture Cops, Everything is Appropriation. And I wanted to just share my response to that because I had few people commenting and it felt like everyone just kind of said their piece, but there was no real exchange going on. Um, and I had a lot to say, so I figured I would just say it out loud. Um, First of all, there's a quote in the article where she says a recent post on Tumblr, "This is not China," declares that cultural appropriation is not merely the act of wearing or partaking in cultural symbols and practices that do not belong to you. It's a system of exploits and capitalization on cultural symbols and practices that do not A. originate from, B. benefit, and C. circle back to the culture in question. When I shared the link, the part that I quoted was, when we attack people for stepping outside their own cultural experiences, we hinder our ability to develop empathy and cross-cultural understanding. Appropriation is not a crime. It's a way to breathe new life into culture. So don't let anyone tell you that there's art, literature, or clothing that does not belong to you because of your racial, ethnic, or religious identity. In other words, appropriate away. Now, of course, that might set some people off right there because everyone knows that appropriation has a negative connotation. But if you read the article, you see these examples where people are being accused of appropriation when it's really not. And that part has really gone overboard to where it's like this lady doesn't have a right to incorporate Russian fairy tales. You know, well, she kind of does because she married a Russian guy, but he's not really Russian because he only lived there until he was 10. And I'm like, what? You know, first of all, you're going to say the first 10 years of your life you don't know anything about Russia. Second of all, she herself has to be Russian in order to be inspired by Russian fairy tales. Um, and someone else was using a Japanese username that she had picked up while she was living abroad in Japan. I mean, those are the ways you were supposed to get to know foreign cultures, where you become a part of it and you learn to respect it and appreciate it. But now that that's being called appropriation, clearly the meaning has gone beyond what appropriation actually is. And that's what this quote is about. That's what the article is about. She's not saying you should actually be appropriating in this negative sense. She's saying all of these examples of where it's not really appropriation that are being called appropriation, that those are okay. And that we need to continue doing because if we're gonna try to stamp all that out, then we're going to a very scary place. Um, in the responses I got, first of all, everyone was like identifying as a person of color, I da 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 da, and as a white person, I da 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 da, and I'm like, what's going on here? Like, why? Why does everyone feel the need to identify themselves as their race? Like, can I not share my opinion without, you know, like declaring my identity first? Is my opinion worth any less or more? I mean, I understand in this particular situation, sure, but I don't know that. I don't know what that's all about. But um, anyway, in the comments, people were jumping in talking about how appropriation is wrong, and I kept pointing out that this article is not talking about actual appropriation, where we're, taking advantage of a culture. It's talking about situations where people are trying to learn about and appreciate a foreign culture, and other people are coming in and telling them, no, 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 that's not your culture. You don't have a right to it. And the originating culture is perfectly fine welcoming foreigners in. And that was one of the comments was that the problem with this article is that it's lumping all people of color together. And even though the Japanese might welcome foreigners wearing kimonos, the Indian might welcome foreigners wearing sari, that might not apply to other cultures like, African cultures or Arab cultures. Like there could be a culture out there who doesn't want foreigners wearing their traditional clothing. But I think, as with everything, it just comes down to whether or not you do it respectfully. Um, it's like there's another article I read last night about straight women in gay clubs. There have always been straight women in gay clubs. They're writing this article like, in the past few weeks, there have been a lot of straight women in gay clubs. I went to gay clubs like a decade ago, so let me tell you, this isn't that new. The thing is, people were coming in as a guest, like if I'm straight walking in there saying, this is not my domain. I'm going to be quiet and polite and respectful and sit back and watch what they do. Because this is not my world. This is their space. And now people are coming in just being loud and disruptive and trying to turn the spotlight on themselves. That's the problem. And this is the exact same problem that's going on with this example. In the article, they mentioned that the Japanese themselves had no problem with foreigners wearing kimonos because it was done in a respectful way. When I was in India, I wore a churidar, and it was perfectly fine. Our hosts were Indian. They welcomed us to buy these clothes. And last year I celebrated Diwali with an Indian friend, and I wore my sari for the first time that I had bought in India. And the people who hosted me while I was in India, they liked the picture. It's nice to see someone foreign, acknowledging your culture if it's done in a respectful way. The problem only arises when you start being disrespectful. So even though Japanese don't mind you wearing kimonos, Indians wouldn't mind you wearing saris, if you're gonna put on that traditional outfit and do something stupid, of course it's gonna be a problem. I also read another thing recently about men being in the maternity wards after their wives give birth. It's not the problem, it's not just that the men are there. It's the way the men are acting, it's just the way people are acting, and that's lumping people together, really. Anyway, I'm digressing too much here. Okay, another comment was it sounds like, white people got their feelings hurt and they're telling people of color to just get over it. Obviously, the person who wrote this, they have their perspective. And me as a reader, I perceive it one way, and you as a reader perceive it another way. But when I read it, that is not the impression that I got at all. It didn't seem in any way sort of angry. And I would hope that people reading this understand that they're not being encouraged to cross the line. That they're being encouraged to go out and take part in other cultures as long as it is done respectfully. But I also understand the way she, and I'm assuming intentionally, misuses the word appropriation in the end there. That might set people off when they see that. Go out and appropriate. Of course, that kind of puts people on edge. But like I said, what she's talking about is not actually appropriation. It's more appreciation. Um, what else? Yes, the other comment was, for example, uh, people will celebrate Cinco de Mayo in the U.S., but every other day of the year they're saying we want to build a wall, get rid of the Mexicans or tell them to get a job or, whatever kind of derogatory comments they come up with. So the problem itself is not that they're celebrating this festival. The problem is how they're treated every other day of the year. Because let's stop and think about it for a second. Nobody really cares if you put on a Dirndl and lederhosen and celebrate Oktoberfest. Because the German people are not oppressed. That's what it really comes down to. It's not stealing an aspect of Mexican culture and using it as an excuse to party without knowing the culture's history. And maybe even not entirely disrespecting something traditional, because it's really more about how are these people treated every day. And if you're taking a minority that has been oppressed and saying, now after all that we've done to you, we're gonna steal your culture and dilute it and what's the word, mutate it or whatever, into something else, and that's just one more strike, like what are those things, microaggressions, yeah, like, it's just one more strike in addition to everything you have to deal with. But that in itself is not the actual problem. It's not a problem that you celebrate Oktoberfest. It's not a problem that you celebrate St. Patrick's Day. But it is a problem that you celebrate Cinco de Mayo. Because the German people are doing just fine today. The Irish people are doing just fine today. The Mexican people are not. Similarly, this Cash Me Outside girl is famous now because she's doing a black accent. And of course it's not actually, restricted to black people. It's just the way, I would say poor, uneducated people in certain neighborhoods talk. Most of them happen to be black, not all of them are. But now that this white girl is going out there talking like that on TV, she's famous. But of course, yes, the truth is, when a black person talks like that, they get ridiculed. It's like, you sound uneducated. How are you going to get a job? You need to put on that professional exterior. This white lady who's saying she identifies as black, I don't know. Anyway, she's white. She grew up in a white family. She grew up in a white neighborhood. She doesn't have any black friends. Clearly, she knows nothing about being black, but she writes a book about what it means to be black, and it's a bestseller. While black people can write a book about being black, and it doesn't get any attention at all. That's where the problem lies. The problem is not the white person talking in this accent. The problem is not the white person writing this book. The problem is that when they do it, it gets attention. And when the native culture, the culture that they got that from, does it, they get ridiculed or ignored. That's the problem. So that's where I'm going to go ahead and say that appropriation, where we're focusing on the white people doing it, that is a distraction. You're distracting from the actual problem of everyday life, which is the bigger picture. You're focusing on this one little aspect of this lady's pretending she's black because whatever, and we're going to focus on her stealing black culture. No, the focus shouldn't even be on her. The focus needs to be on the black community, on the Mexican community, on the Native community, whatever community is being oppressed, not on the people doing the appropriating. You know, because in this case, this is, you know, actual appropriation. And someone else commented that when you have, for example, like in the hip-hop culture that is something black, you have white artists come in and, you know, they stand out in that community. They might make it big first. You know, the same way this Kashmir girl and this white black lady, you know, the same way they kind of rose to the top there. You have, you know, white artists walk into hip-hop and they might get recognized faster. But that it's their duty to acknowledge the roots of where that came from. Let me just read this. Yeah, you need to show appreciation for the culture and respect by acknowledging what transpired to bring about the aspects of the culture you're borrowing. You have more of an obligation to stand up for the rights of that culture than someone who doesn't borrow. Any non-person of color that uses rap to benefit monetarily should also be tirelessly bringing to light the positive aspects of the culture instead of using stereotypes. They should have a vested interest in ensuring that the public is made aware of systemic injustices and inequalities, and that the culture faces, and be at the forefront of demanding equality for that culture. That, you know, I completely agree with. In this case of you know, where we're talking now about actual appropriation, yeah, if you're gonna take something like, you know, black culture and don this outfit as a white person and profit off of it, then you take with it that obligation to say, look, black people are not this stereotype where, you know, you have black actors saying the only role I can get is playing some kind of thug, or Indian actors saying, you know, the only role I can get is where I have to do a silly accent, even though, you know, I was born here in America. Where they're being restricted into this stereotype. But we know, of course, not all black people are thugs. So if you're gonna go in and make it big and get famous off of talking black, saying you're black, rapping, which is, you know, then you have an obligation to say, look, the world at large, not all black people are thugs. Just get that idea out of your mind. You know, there are, you know, inspirational black people. There are people who are good role models, who are good husbands and dads, and you know, you need to get out there and talk about that positivity. That I agree with. But like I said, if you've got people profiting off of appropriation, you need to stop focusing on them because they're the distraction. You need to focus on the culture that's being appropriated in everyday life and focus on fixing that. And that's it. I've said my piece, gone on way too long. Bye.